Well, good morning, everyone. I think we're just fractions from being right on time, tad early. I'm Mark Mongan, and my co-host is Ben Benton, and we welcome you to our February 13th, 2024 Enlist Applicator webinar update. And I'm killing a little bit of time so that everyone can get let in on the system here, because I know that takes a second or two for everyone to come up live. But I think we're close. I cover Michigan, Ohio, and the Northeast. And Ben, why don't you go ahead and finish your introduction and start into our presentation?
Okay, thank you, Mark. Yeah, Ben Benton. I'm the enlist field specialist. I live down here in Lubbock, Texas, but I cover Kansas, Colorado, Western Texas, New Mexico, Arizona, etc. So anyhow, we're certainly glad you joined us this morning, and we'll try to lead you through some good information here. So we'll jump right in. That's us. And so we're going to start off with a little bit of a 2023 season recap. Then I'll jump into talking about the traits some, and then we'll have a couple of Q&A sessions, but we'll have our first Q&A session then. And then Mark will get us started off talking about some stewardship, and then we'll talk about the weed control systems approach. And then finally, we'll wrap up real strong with some of the labor requirements and making good applications, doing the best job we can to get weed control, because that's what we're after, right? And again, we'll stop a couple of times for questions, and those are in the chat feature there. So, okay, so starting off with a bit of a recap. As of 2023, it's now the Enlist Weed Control System is now the #1 soybean trait technology in the United States. Well over 50% of the market, U.S. soybean market last year in 23 was planted to the Enlist E3 Weed Control System. There's been over 140 million acres sprayed with Enlist, and something kind of interesting, you'll see that the vast majority of those acres are planted to or sprayed with Enlist 1 herbicide, as opposed to Enlist Duo herbicide. Enlist Duo was the first one we came out with, but it's rapidly switched over to the Enlist 1. There's just lots of tank mix flexibilities there, and we're gonna go through some of those benefits as we proceed. Talking about the three crops that have the Enlist trait in them. So right there at the top, you see the Enlist E3 soybeans. Many folks will be familiar with those. And you see we also have the Enlist corn and Enlist cotton. And you see the herbicide tolerances, three of the herbicide tolerances are the same in all three trait systems. So you've got tolerance to 2,4-D choline, and that is the active ingredient in the Enlist herbicide. So we kind of talk about those. Sometimes we say 2,4-D choline, and sometimes we say Enlist, but it's the same thing we're talking about there. And then, of course, glyphosate, which is Roundup, and glufosinate, which is your Liberties. Now, on the Enlist corn system, you see that we also have tolerance to the FOP herbicide, which the labeled herbicide there is going to be Assure 2, so that's Quizalofop. So anyhow, those are the trait tolerances that we have on the various systems. Now let's talk about the weed control system and kind of a program approach and how we want to approach these things. So the Enlist Weed Control System is a wonderful over-the-top treatment for you, but certainly we want to handle these things in a responsible and systematic way. So here you have the Enlist Weed Control System program approach for cotton. And so you see we start clean with tillage or burn down. You can use Enlist Duo or Enlist 1 in a burn down situation. A couple of products from Corteva, Elevore lead off. Certainly there's other products out there you could use ahead of planting. And then plant our Enlist cotton. Now, one thing I do want to mention, normally when planting non-Enlist cotton, you had a 30-day plant back restriction if you used 2,4-D in a burn down application. With Enlist cotton, you can burn down with 2,4-D and plant the cotton immediately afterwards. So you don't have to wait that 30 days if you're planting Enlist cotton and burning down with 2,4-D. So that's a nice little benefit there. So after we plant our cotton, then we want any number of soil residuals to go out in our systems approach. Cotton farmers are well aware of lots of different options: prowl, treflan, diuron, cotoran, all the different things that you can use in a soil residual situation. A couple here at the top that are available from Corteva, but again, many other options that are available to a cotton farmer there. And then we get into our post applications to clean up hopefully what weeds are left, and hopefully it's not that many after we have a good foundation set. So again, up to first white bloom, you can spray Enlist Duo or Enlist One over the top. Glyphosate, certainly you're aware that it's basically available almost season long, right up to not long before harvest. And then Liberty herbicide can be put out in tank mixes as well, up to early bloom. So gives you 3 different over-the-top choices to clean up out there. Very similar situation on the soybeans. So this is E3 soybean approach. Again, start clean with tillage or burn down. You can use that Enlist One or Enlist Duo, as well as Elevore or any number of other things that are labeled across for your soybeans. Plant your beans. And then again, here's another round of products, soil residual products available from Corteva that can be used. And certainly you can use other soil applied products as you see fit in your operation. And then talking about cleaning up with our Enlist herbicides, you can apply Enlist herbicides through the R1 stage. So that is one difference in the Enlist system and a dicamba system, is we do not have a calendar limitation on when we can apply these herbicides. Some places have double crop soybeans, and you can spray Enlist based on the growth of the plant, not based on when the calendar tells you have to spray Enlist. So that's a nice benefit the Enlist system has. So, and then glyphosate can go through the R2 growth stage, excuse me, and Liberty can be applied through the R1 growth stage. So that's our program approach on the E3 soybeans. And finally on the corn, which you'll be seeing a lot more corn here coming in the very near future on the Enlist corn system, and we've got summertime plots promoting those. So again, start clean with tillage or burn down. Enlist Duo, Enlist One, basis blend, a number of other products. Again, no plant back restrictions on Enlist corn. Plant our corn, and then here's a whole host of things you can apply as a pre-residual, as well as a post-tank mix residual partner with Enlist herbicides. So again, get us a good foundation. Mark will be covering weeds in a minute, but the best weed's one that never comes up, right? So try to get those weeds to never come up with a good systems approach. Now, as we get into our post application windows, you'll see you can apply Enlist herbicides up to V8 or 30 inches tall right over the top. Now, I draw your attention down here to this second bullet point. That's exactly the same as the glyphosate limitations, which is V8 through 30 inches tall. So that's something growers are very used to, is that glyphosate V8 to 30 inches tall, and you can do the same with the Enlist. Another thing you can do is with drop nozzles, you can extend that up to 48-inch tall corn, labeled over the top with a full pound of 2,4-D choline. So very, very flexible system there. Liberty, of course, we can go up to the V7 growth stage or 24 inches tall. And on the Assure 2 that I mentioned earlier, that's your FOP herbicide. And that can be applied, gives you a nice potential to clean up Johnson grass, shatter cane, something like that, or go in and clean up a volunteer corn issue. If you've got an eardrop from the previous year's non-Enlist cotton or non-Enlist corn crop, pardon me, you can go in and clean that up with some Assure 2. And just one little note there, be be cognizant of what you're putting in with that Assure 2, because you kind of have one shot there at V2 to V6 growth stage, and you want to make sure and get a good kill with that product. And so let's not put too much in the tank that might antagonize and not get full performance out of that Assure 2. So with that being said, I'm going to jump right into the next slide and let Mark take over.
Well, thank you, Ben. Now, this is a real detailed slide. I'll say at the onset, but we're always talking about different active ingredients, multiple modes of action. So I think it's just incumbent upon us to take a little bit of time and detail you on something that I'm sure all of you have seen before, but it's just good refresher. And we have, of course, these groups and the various modes of action and some products. There are examples of it. So if you'll allow me to give you this basic herbicide overview, I think it's helpful. The first one, of course, group 1 would be your lipid synthesis inhibitors. And those are ACE inhibitors, FOPs and DIMs, and Assure that Ben was just talking about would fit in group 1. Group 2 would be your amino acid synthesis inhibitors. Those are ALS inhibitors or EPSP synthesis inhibitors. Example would be Roundup. Your ALS inhibitor would be Prowl. The growth regulators would be group 4 and group 19, and those have various sites. And for 19, it would be auxin transport. Enlist is a great example of a group 4, and status would be your example of a group 19. Your photosynthesis inhibitors would be group 5 and 6, and those are photosystem 2 inhibitors, atrazine and metribuzin, good examples. Next would be your nitrogen metabolism, and that's group 10. This is your glutamine synthesis, Liberty. We've all worked with that over the last 10, 20 years. Then, of course, you have your pigment inhibitors. That would be group 13 and group 27. Your 13 would be your DOXP synthesis inhibitors. Command would be your example of that. Your group 27 would be your HPPD inhibitors. Callisto is your example of that. Then you have your cell membrane disruptors, and those would be a group 14 or a group 22. The group 14 would be exhibited by a PPO inhibitor like Valor or Flexstar. Your group 22 would be your photosynthesis 1 inhibitor, gramoxone, good example. And then finally, to wrap this up, you've got your group 3, which are your seedling root growth inhibitors. And these are microtubular inhibitors, and Prowl H2O would be a good example of that, as well as your group 15 seedling shoot growth inhibitors, which are long chain fatty acid inhibitors, and Surpass NXT acetochlor would be a great example of that. So to summarize, we have a lot of tools in this toolbox. We just feel like it's instructive to review these from time to time because we are doing a lot more detailed and more involved tank mix applications than ever before. And so I think it's important to review these basics. Go ahead, Ben. The best management practices for Enlist applications on corn. Need to spray when weeds are small. I mean, we can't emphasize that enough. You'll see a little camera in the slides from time to time. This is the first one to show it. That's to just encourage you to take a screenshot of this. We welcome it. Mainly, we want to emphasize the rates. Enlist 1 herbicide, 2 pints per acre. Enlist Duo, 4.75 pints per acre. Use the recommended rate. We want to spray when these weeds are 2 to 3 inches tall. Maximum height, 6 inches. Just want to make sure the weeds are actively growing. Apply full rates to manage resistant or hard to control weeds. Use qualified nozzles that provide the best possible coverage. Use the upper end of that approved label pressure, and use sufficient water carrier. 10 to 15 gallons is recommended. And use appropriate spray additives like crop oil concentrate, methylated seed oil, or ammonium sulfate. Those additives certainly make a big difference. Next slide. Why spray small weeds? Weed management urgency, for example, the height, the growth, the ability, and seed production can be underestimated. That's to say the least. Water hemp and Palmer amaranth grow at a very rapid pace, multiple inches a day in the right conditions, with prolific seed production. We've all heard this again and again, but it bears repeating. Auxiliary growth of seed heads outside the primary growing point are really the crux of the issue. Water hemp with multiple seed auxiliary growth can be more difficult to control compared to the same size without the branching out. And that's really the key concept here. Killing a 6-inch palmer or water hemp can sometimes be like fighting a much, much larger plant. That's why we want to spray these weeds when they're small. Next slide. Check the Enlist-tankmix.com for tank mixes. And I just can't emphasize enough the tools that Corteva has put out there online. You'll see a little logo up there, Enlist Ahead. If you've got the Enlist Ahead app on your phone, I would encourage you to use it. If you don't, certainly go check it out. It has all this information, including the Enlist-tankmix.com info. Qualified tank mix partners are products that pass the EPA mandated drift testing protocol. One reason for this testing protocol is for drift protecting sensitive areas where endangered species may have habitat. So that's key that we keep the drift out of there. Qualified tank mix partners are not tested for crop response, tested for physical tank mix compatibility, an agronomic recommendation from Corteva Agriscience, an endorsement of any kind from Corteva Agriscience, or an indicator of performance. Lastly, Enlist and Duo and Enlist One herbicides may only be tank mixed with products that have been tested and found not to adversely affect the spray drift properties of Enlist herbicides. A list of those products may be found at the aforementioned enlisttankmix.com. Enlist One offers additional tank mix flexibility with products such as Liberty herbicide. So there are key benefits to this. Products listed on enlisttankmix.com, as I mentioned before, have not been tested for crop response, for example, leaf burn. In addition, tank mix products may cause increased crop response. Applications of products containing crop oils or vegetable-based oils are more likely to result in crop response. Again, many of you know this, but I think it's useful to repeat it and review. And the listing does not imply, obviously, an endorsement of use. Next slide.
At our first Q&A, so far, I'm not seeing any questions. Mark, are you seeing any?
No, Ben, and I'd say with everything we've got to convey here today, let's keep rolling. And I'm sure there'll be questions at the end, and I welcome them. Okay?
All righty, next slide.
Okay, here's the Enlist Ahead, Enlist trait, and herbicide stewardship. And this is our debut of these slides. The spirit of this is education and stewardship to really protect Enlist and the traits and the technology for the long haul. Please, next slide. Enlist herbicides with Colex-D technology are the only 2,4-D containing products authorized and specially labeled for use on Enlist crops. We all know that. Enlist herbicides are not the same as other 2,4-D containing products and bring additional benefits to the farmers and the environment. Reduced potential for drift with Enlist herbicides when applied according to label. For example, Colex-D provides 90% less drift than traditional 2,4-D formulations. The EPA mandated testing of tank mix partners and sprayer nozzles to confirm that they do not significantly increase drift. Near zero volatility with Enlist herbicides, and substantially reduces the volatility versus an unauthorized 2,4-D product. For example, 2,4-D choline or Enlist is 96% less volatile than 2,4-D ester. And 2,4-D choline or Enlist is 88% less volatile than 2,4-D amine. Enlist herbicides were the first to be evaluated and registered consistent with the EPA's new Endangered Species Assessment Policy, or ESA. Unauthorized use of non-Enlist 2,4-D herbicides in Enlist crops may pose threats to those endangered species. Next slide. Corteva promotes compliant Enlist herbicide and seed use. We have a technology use agreement, which is the agreement between the grower and Corteva Agriscience. The technology use agreement, or TUA, is required to access the seed technology. The TUA, in addition to other requirements, outlines acceptable herbicide use on Enlist crops. Corteva works with its approved retailers to properly position and promote appropriate Enlist stewardship for trait and herbicide longevity. Corteva provides farmers and retailers with the Enlist system, training materials, and offers training, which includes how to accomplish effective and compliant herbicide use. For instance, online webinars such as we're in right now, self-paced training material, in-person events such as field days or training meetings. We have a team of Enlist field specialists throughout the Corn Belt and the country to provide expertise and guidance. And last but not least, Enlist Product Use Guide, a very useful publication I would encourage you to take advantage of. Next slide. Enlist herbicides with Colex-D technologies are the only 2,4-D containing products authorized and specifically labeled for use on Enlist crops. Can't emphasize that enough. Not following the pesticide label is illegal and can result in state and federal fines. Unauthorized non-Enlist 2,4-D use on Enlist crops, resulting in off-target movement and damage to neighboring fields, is the responsibility of the grower applicator and is unlikely to be covered by the grower or applicator's insurance. It also can result in the grower being placed on the unauthorized grower list, resulting in the loss of access to Enlist seed and Corteva Agriscience seed. It also threatens access to the technology for all stakeholders, including farmers and retailers. Re-registration, for example, may be threatened in the future. Future use restrictions could be imposed. If the regulatory restrictions are imposed, Enlist herbicides may not be available when you need them in the future. Finally, it reduces innovation and reinvestment. When the unauthorized use of herbicide occurs, it impacts future investments into new technologies, risking both the current technology and future technologies. Next slide. To wrap up here, Corteva is protecting the Enlist traits and the Enlist herbicides by instituting an anonymous tip line. That's 1-844-SEED-TIP to allow any stakeholders to report suspected inappropriate Enlist seed or Enlist herbicide use, promoting and enforcing the terms of the Technology Use Agreement, or TUA, and proper Enlist herbicide. This benefits our customers, our licensees, and our business partners. It also helps to ensure customers have the broadest use of technology for years to come. It maintains Corteva's reputation for future product registrations. It also ensures our long-term commitment to the products and technology for the industry. We're exploring new technology and tools that distinguish the differences between Enlist herbicides, for instance, 2,4-D choline with Colex-D, versus an unauthorized 2,4-D formulation. Under the terms of the TUA, conducting random customer audits and investigating allegations of misuse. In the cases of confirmed misuse or inappropriate promotion, along with education, the following can occur: potentially reporting illegal use to the state and federal agencies, seeking restitution from the grower, restricting a grower's access to seed technology, and restricting retailers' access to Enlist herbicides.
All righty, Mark. Thank you.
Sure.
We'll let you take a break for a second here. That's quite a bit. So anyhow, now I'm going to jump into some application considerations and label requirements. And I will say, Mark, there now have been several questions generated, and we will be addressing those. Don't worry, we'll take time here at the end of the presentation, and we'll address all these questions. So we'll be getting right around to those. Okay, so in application aspects, we want to select an approved nozzle and pressure range. Then we're going to talk a little about deposition aids, sensitive areas, susceptible crops, and talk about when to spray. So this first thing is a real key slide here. We're going to talk through this a little bit, but again, a couple of things. You're welcome to take a picture of this. There is an Enlist Ahead app that is available for iPhones or the Apple products. Unfortunately, it is not available for the Android devices. There's actually a question in the Q&A on that. So no, it is not available on the Android devices, Apple phones only. But again, you can get all of this information in that Enlist Ahead app. And Mark already mentioned our product use guide. The new 2024 product use guide should be out this month. So within the next couple of weeks, you can get a printed copy of that from a Corteva crop protection or seed employee. But also, this is all available on an Enlist Ahead, the Enlist.com website or Enlist Tank Mix. They all lead to the same place, and you can get this information. Let's go through these a little bit. So before spraying, we want to think about our application window. I already went through those. When is the proper stages to apply to the various crops? Think about what your tank mix partners are going to be. Go to enlisttankmix.com and follow through on that good systems approach on what we want to put in the tank at any given time. Then using our approved nozzles, I'll show a chart here in a moment. And those charts are available again in the product use guide, the websites, and the Enlist Ahead app. So there are quite a number of qualified nozzles available for various pressures and situations, pulse width, modulation, etc. And then, let's start with a clean sprayer, right? And so then we get into the actual application. Are we using the right sprayer volumes? We recommend 10 to 15 gallons per acre, no less than 10 gallons per acre when spraying Enlist. And then special note, when we're putting out Liberty, we sure think we ought to be at 15 to 20 gallons per acre. The more water we put out, particularly I'm in an arid part of the country, and the more water we use with Liberty, the better chance we have of giving that product to get a good knockdown on the weeds for us there. So 15 to 20 gallons when mixing with Liberty. Spray rate. Again, Mark went over those. 2 pints per acre on Enlist 1 and 4.7 pints per acre on Enlist Duo. That gives you a full pound of 2,4-D choline active at those rates. Spray pressures, using the right, with the nozzles and the calibrations that you're aiming for, making sure where pressure's right. And then boom height. The label reads no more than 24 inches above the crop canopy. Every time that boom goes up another foot can exponentially give you exposure to that product moving off target with the wind, and that's not what we want. We want to get that product on the weeds where it can do its job. Pay special attention to the wind. We need to be 3 to 10 miles per hour, and certainly not spraying into an inversion, which is a dangerous situation. And then susceptible crops is paramount of knowing where that wind could possibly take any driftable fines off of the field. And so we want to be aware of any non-Enlist cotton, tomatoes, grapes, cucurbits, and certainly homesteads and things like that would have sensitive plants in them. Finally, clean out. These are water-soluble herbicides. The Enlist products are water-soluble and can be cleaned out, but again, that's assuming starting with a clean sprayer. So anyhow, that kind of goes through those. Here are some examples, and you're not meant to be able to read that. Certainly, these charts are available on the website. Here's one of the pages of Enlist 1 nozzles. Here's one of the pages, the Enlist Duo nozzles. Each line represents a nozzle, and these are pressure ranges for each of those nozzles. You can see, depending on the size nozzle, some pressures are approved and some are not approved, different pressure ranges. The nozzles listed in yellow give the absolute best weed control, largest droplet size, the best drift protection. And so those are the ones in yellow, like a TTI, T-Jet TTI nozzle would be an example of an approved nozzle with absolute maximum drift protection. However, the nozzles in green, if you're in an area that doesn't require that much drift protection and you're surrounded by corn and sorghum and other non-susceptible crops and pastures, then we recommend going with a green nozzle. Mark's going to go into that in more detail here in just a moment on why that is. We want to get the best coverage to actually get our best weed control possible. There are nozzles available for the newer pulse width modulation systems. There's some John Deere and Wilger nozzles available to do that. They've got little notations on those charts there. Again, you can take a picture of this, screenshot, the Enlist Ahead app, product use guide, etc. And certainly on the websites is the easiest place to go to get all of this information for the nozzles. And finally, just a little picture showing here what an inversion might be like. You don't always have fog with an inversion, but typically there's no wind. It can happen at dawn or dusk on certain days, and certainly there's certain states have a good mesonet to check those sites, but we don't want to spray into those because that's when those driftable fines, particulates can hang up in that inversion layer, and then you never know where it's going to blow. It could blow any direction when the wind picks up. So we don't want to be spraying in those situations. Okay, Mark, we'll let you take us to the next one here.
So this references what Ben alluded to about spray coverage, the gallons per acre, and the nozzle. So up in the upper left-hand corner, you have your AIXR, very popular coarse nozzle at 10 gallons per acre. And there we see about a 20.2% coverage. To the right of that would be your TTI, ultra coarse nozzle. Again, you see the percentage of coverage drop from 20 down to 11.7. Then compare that or contrast that to 20 gallons per acre. So that would be your bottom two slides. So the bottom left would be your AIXR, that coarse nozzle. You've got 40.5% coverage. Again, contrast that to the TTI, at even 20 gallons per acre, you're still only at 25.8% coverage. So that's a good illustration, as we try to add some qualitative, quantitative analysis to various nozzles and spray patterns and coverage. Next slide. Deposition aids with Enlist herbicides. Alone, you can see this is an illustration where we're trying to use a magnified photographic example of how much penetration you would achieve with various spray solutions. So if you had Enlist alone, you can see the illustration there up in the upper left-hand corner. Contrast that to the one directly to the right, which is a 0.25% non-ionic surfactant. And again, it's a visual example of how much coverage that you would achieve on the plant and in the cells. Compare or contrast that to the lower left, which is a 1% crop oil concentrate. And finally, last but not least, in the lower right, a 1% methylated seed oil. And I think the whole message that we're trying to convey here is that additives do make a difference. Certainly, methylated seed oil is the one that has the most impact. And there's always considerations about speckling and non-target damage to crops, but efficacy is paramount. And certainly when weeds are hardened off, and as we went through last spring, much of the Corn Belt was in a drought situation when we went out to apply our herbicides in the spring, and the methylated seed oil made a big difference in getting control of hardened off weeds. Next slide. Enlist susceptible crops. Plant applications when the wind is blowing away from susceptible crops. Can't emphasize that enough. Do not spray when the wind is blowing toward a susceptible crop or susceptible plants. The illustration at the very top, it's okay to spray when the wind direction is going from your susceptible plants toward an application area for Enlist herbicides. The slide at the bottom would be a good example of when not to spray. And here you have your Enlist herbicides and the wind is going towards susceptible plants. That's a no-go. Susceptible crop examples would be cotton without Enlist, grapes, cucurbits, fruiting vegetables, tomatoes, or tobacco are very susceptible crop examples. Next slide. Enlist compatible crops. There are a number of crops that are compatible with Enlist. Soybeans, corn, rice, wheat, sugarcane, alfalfa, peanuts, and sorghum are all Enlist compatible crops. So we do have some options and some flexibility in the row crop area. Next slide.
Clarify, Mark, does that mean you can spray Enlist over all those crops?
No, I think the point is if you have adjacent fields with these crops, you would have a added buffer bin and more of a safety factor. Spraying next to soybeans with Enlist if you're applying to Enlist corn. Sensitive area buffers. Sensitive area buffers are a requirement from the EPA to protect potential endangered species habitat areas, such as woodlands, woodlots, pastures, roadside ditches, and lawns. Those are all sensitive area examples. Sensitive area buffers are not meant to protect downwind susceptible crops, including non-list cotton. That's key. Next slide. 2,4-D choline inherently is less volatile. And here's an illustration. And this harkens back to our chemistry classes. And I think it's instructive. 2,4-D amine DMA breaks apart, leaving behind a volatile 2,4-D acid. You can see the 2,4-D amine molecule and the fact that you have the bonds that break down and the amine vaporizes, leaving the acid. And that's, I'm referring to the illustration in the upper left-hand side of this chart. Right below that, you would have 2,4-D choline or Enlist, which is much more stable. And it is all to do with those bonds. You see both bonds are intact. So the 2,4-D choline is bonded tight to that charged 2,4-D acid and choline salt, and certainly provides a much more stable herbicide. Take a look at the left-hand side of this, or right-hand side of this slide. You've got your cumulative 2,4-D vapor loss at 70 hours after treatment. So here's the percent of applied 2,4-D. The 2,4-D ester, you can see almost 4%, 2,4-D amine, a little over 1%, and almost negligible would be your 2,4-D choline. And that's why we refer to this as near zero volatility. 2,4-D choline is inherently less volatile than traditional forms of 2,4-D. Next slide. 2,4-D choline, with its near zero volatility, is substantially less volatile than even the most advanced BAPMA formulation of dicamba. The BAPMA dicamba plus glyphosate formulation relative to Enlist Duo is 98% less volatile. So on an acid-to-acid basis, 2,4-D is 236 times less volatile than dicamba. And I think we're seeing that in the countryside with the results of Enlist and its ability to stay where we put it compared to some of the other products out there.
All right, thanks, Mark. Now I'm going to go over just a little bit of crop response that you can sometimes see. I wouldn't say you expect to see, but sometimes you can see these things. Uh, First, in corn, we can see a little bit of temporary auxin response sometimes. Could appear within a few hours after application. It's going to dissipate within 24 to 48 hours, and it's likely due to the rapid effect of 2,4-D in-plant metabolized by the enzyme. There's no impact on yield, and this is a metabolism type trait. And so in all of the crops, that crop has to metabolize the 2,4-D that's sprayed over the top of it, whereas the weeds cannot, and that's why the weeds die, but the crop metabolizes it. So again, and particularly on some hot conditions and other things, you can see some crop response. Here's some example in soybeans. Probably many folks on the phone may be aware of these. We can have some leaf drooping. You can have a similar response in cotton sometimes. Again, it's temporary. Can appear within a few hours after application. We notice it more in cotton country if you spray when it's 82 degrees in the morning and that afternoon goes well over 100 degrees. Well, sometimes that afternoon that plant's not metabolizing that product after once it gets above 95 or 98 degrees, and so you get a little droopy type situation. Again, that's going to dissipate in 12 to 36 hours. As it metabolizes, there's going to be no impact on yield there. Leaf necrosis, we can see this in all the crops as well. It's going to appear within the leaves that got hit with the herbicides. The new leaf is going to come out and be clean and have no necrosis on it. Again, there's no impact on yield there. That's the soybeans. And here's an example in cotton. Here's some Enlist Duo sprayed over Enlist cotton. This happens to be the competitor. Same type of thing. Very similar situation where the product, and particularly the more MSO or crop oil you have in there, as well as your tank mix partners, can even heat up these products and cause a little more phyto on your plant leaves. So again, you're not going to see a yield response from that, and any new leaves coming out after that are going to be nice and clean. And that would be really on all three crops. You can see some kind of response like this in corn, soybeans, or cotton, but not always. So just something to be aware that could happen out there. So Mark?
Okay, let's summarize and wrap this up. Clearly, the Enlist Weed Control System is growing. It's growing exponentially. We're now up to 55% of market penetration in soybeans in 2023, and we have you to thank for that. We appreciate that trust and that support in the system. Launching of PowerCore and PowerCore Ultra Enlist and Vorceed Enlist is paramount to continuing this growth of the product. Phytogen cotton has continued to grow in key markets. So these are all very positive trends, things that we're excited about. It gives us momentum for this technology. Enlist One and Enlist Duo herbicide continue to deliver exceptional on-target and neighbor-friendly weed control that growers are annually spraying on 80% of the Enlist E3 soybeans. So that's a key indicator of how well it's working. Growers are continuing to switch to Enlist Weed Control System because of the superior yield and application flexibility and overall certainty that this weed control system offers in the marketplace. And finally, have confidence in robust trait tolerance and broad spectrum weed control this system can deliver in your farming operation for the upcoming 2024 season. Find more resources at www.enlist.com. Again, that's just something that is so key to have this information accessible out there on the internet, readily available to you. Enlist.com certainly has all the Enlist Ahead training, which is the link at the top of the site for additional webinar signups and webinar recordings and tank mix partner lists, as well as the nozzle lists. All this information is available, including Enlist Ahead literature like the product use guide that we've talked about, and an application guide, as well as tank mix sequence guidance and additional literature pieces. For those of you who do have the iPhone capability, this Enlist Ahead app is very, very useful and would recommend it highly. And we're working to get this available for Androids, and hopefully we'll have that soon.
All right, well, Mark, that brings us to our second round of questions, and we've got a few of those. Mark, you just answered the first one again there. We on the there was a question on the Enlist Ahead app on the iPhones and Androids, and you just answered that one. Somebody asked where they can get something about this presentation, and the best way to do that is just what Mark went over on
Right.
all the resources, the Enlist Ahead app, the product use guide, and then certainly the websites. Everything we covered will be covered on those websites somewhere. And then if you've got further questions, certainly we encourage you to talk to one of our counterparts, the Enlist field specialist, and or your Corteva crop protection rep, and or any of your Corteva seed reps. Should be quite well versed in most everything we covered today as well. Couple on Mark, there is one here. Will having to do with spraying a different 2,4-D amine drop nozzle into shoulder high corn, and the answer would be no, because that wouldn't be labeled application, because the as Mark went over in the stewardship section, only the Enlist branded products are labeled for over the top in Enlist corn or Enlist crops.
Correct.
Mark, I'll let you take one. There's a couple on nozzles there.
Yeah, is there an advantage to using more than 15 gallons of water? And I'd say if you have Liberty in the tank, yes. Certainly, we really encourage 15 to 20 gallons of water when you're utilizing Enlist with Liberty. It's a very good combination, and it likes water. Please clarify nozzle type for John Deere Exact Apply system. Again, would refer you to our enlist.com website, and there they have the details on the nozzles, including the John Deere Exact Apply system, the pulse system, and you can get exactly the information that is recommended with the pressure. And then finally, it says, I noticed the recommended application of Trivents or Resicor is post-plant. Does that mean pre-emergence? Can it be applied at burn down? And I believe we'll answer that offline. I'll type up an answer to make sure and respond back directly to make sure that we have the right details on that.
And let's see, there was one just on recommended spray tips, but I think that was before we actually went over the spray tip section of the presentation. So again, all those, if you check online or in the product use guide or the app, you'll find those recommended spray tips for those type of situations. Mark, I think that rounds out where we're at on questions. We appreciate y'all's participation and your attendance this morning. We and as Mark said earlier, we greatly appreciate your business and support. And I hope you've learned a little something today. Mark, anything else to add?
No, again, it bears repeating. We appreciate so much your confidence in this Enlist system and your patronage of our products. We just can't emphasize that enough. We thank you for your business, and I will type up a response to that last questionnaire about Resicor and Trivents and make sure that the details are provided there for anyone who wants the specifics, but I want to make sure we get the details right. Okay?
All right. Well, that takes us to the end just a little bit early, and we'll yield back a few minutes back to you this morning.
Everyone have a good week.